Okay, so today we're really diving deep, and this one's especially for you, our listeners.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because someone reached out, one of you guys actually.
One of our listeners. Awesome.
Exactly, and shared, well, a pretty intense story about their experience navigating the VA healthcare system.
The VA, always a hot topic.
You said it, and this one gets, well, complicated.
So what's the mission for today's deep dive then?
We're going to break it down piece by piece, see what went wrong or maybe what went right. Who knows?
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So this listener, we'll call them KB, sent us basically their personal account.
Firsthand. I like it.
Yeah, like right from the trenches, about all these roadblocks they hit trying to get care at the VA after moving.
A relocation. Oh, that can always add a layer of, well, a layer of everything, right?
You're telling me in KB's situation, phew, it's multi-layered to say the least.
Multiple layers, multiple issues. I'm ready.
All right, so KB is a veteran Gulf War era and has a pretty extensive medical history.
Extensive meeting.
Well, we're talking thyroid cancer, diagnosed and treated. Then there's demyelination lesions, in the brain, which can be pretty serious stuff.
Impacting neurological function, for sure.
Exactly. And then, get this, a venomous anomaly from a previous head injury.
Venomous anomaly. That's a new one for me.
Yeah, it's not common, let's just say that. And then on top of all that, a pituitary adenoma.
Okay, pituitary adenoma, so endocrine systems involved.
You got it. And with that, cyclic Cushing's.
Cyclic Cushing's, wow. So we're already talking multiple complex and some pretty rare conditions.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting because KB's care hasn't been just, at the local clinic.
No, you're saying top tier places.
Yeah, we're talking Mayo Clinic, Emory, Vanderbilt, the big league. So they have a very established, I guess, treatment plan developed by some of the, well, best in the business.
Okay, so we've got a veteran with a serious and well-documented medical history, a solid treatment plan from leading institutions, and then they enter a new VA system.
And that's when it all seems to kind of go off the rails, right?
I'm sensing a conflict brewing here.
Big time. And it really boils down to, I think, this clash between KB's existing care plan, the one developed by these specialists at Mayo, and how the VA in Orlando specifically decided to approach their care.
So Orlando's VA isn't exactly on board with the Mayo plan.
That's putting it mildly. And the biggest areas of disagreement seem to be around diagnostic imaging, especially this specific type of MRI, a Tesla 7, and then the whole approach to integrating different therapies that KB was already doing.
Therapies like?
Chiropractic, acupuncture, manual therapy, things like that.
Okay, so let's break it down chronologically. Starting with the move, how does it all begin?
So KB relocates to Orlando, right, and registers at the VA. But initially under this travel status.
Travel status meaning?
They were still technically, I guess, registered in Augusta, Georgia.
So in transition, but planning to make Orlando permanent.
Exactly. So they're trying to be proactive, keep the care going smoothly.
Makes sense, especially with such a complex medical history.
But, and this is a big but, almost as soon as they start interacting with the Orlando VA, problems pop up, like immediately.
What kind of problems?
Well, first of all, KB says the Orlando VA claimed they couldn't access their, national medical records.
Wait, the VA couldn't access their own system?
That's what KB's telling us. And that's weird, right? Because the whole point of the VA electronic health records is that it's supposed to be, unified, accessible anywhere.
Yeah, that's the idea. Nationwide access, so doctors have the full picture.
And especially for someone who's been to places like Mayo, you'd think those records would be, I don't know, easily accessible.
You'd hope so for continuity of care, especially in a complex case.
And it wasn't just about getting the records, because even when they, did manage to get some information over, the Orlando VA, KB says, seemed to want to go in a completely different direction with their treatment.
Like a totally different approach.
Yeah.
Ignoring the previous care.
It seems that way. And KB gives some specific examples, like acupuncture.
Okay, acupuncture. Interesting. What about it?
So at Mayo, KB was getting acupuncture specifically to manage their fibromyalgia, right?
Fibromyalgia, yeah, makes sense.
But the Orlando VA, they wanted to, only consider it for chronic pain.
Chronic pain, well, that's pretty broad, isn't it?
Exactly, and it kind of felt like they were missing the point, that it was actually helping KB specifically with the fibromyalgia.
So potentially overlooking the nuances of KB's individual needs and the effectiveness of the previous treatment.
Right, and it wasn't just acupuncture. They also started putting limits on KB's chiropractic care.
Even though KB had those service-connected spinal issues, right?
Tons of them. Degenerative disc disease, thoracic outlet syndrome, both sides, spondylitis, the whole 9 yards.
All things that often benefit from chiropractic treatment.
Exactly. So these restrictions, they didn't make sense to KB, especially since these were, service-connected, impacting their whole life.
So it's not just about pain relief. It's about managing disabilities stemming from their service.
And then there's the manual therapy issue.
Manual therapy. Okay, remind me what that's for specifically.
KB have partial paralysis in their arms, service-connected, and then sciatica in both legs.
Ouch, both legs.
Yeah, and it stems from those, neck and back problems we talked about.
Right, the spinal issues.
And they were getting manual therapy to help manage all that. But even that, it became like this whole ordeal to access consistently.
It sounds like a real disconnect between what the specialist had established and what Orlando VA was willing to do.
Like they weren't even looking at the full picture, just kind of doing their own thing,
So you've got this lack of access to records, a seeming disregard for the established care plan.
Mm-hmm.
What else? What was the next big hurdle for KB?
Well, the neuro-ophthalmology stuff, that got pretty intense.
Neuro-ophthalmology, so vision and the brain, right?
Right. So KB has a history of vision loss, and I mean like serious episodes, even while on active duty.
Wow, during service. That's significant.
Yeah, and then on top of that, they had this TBI, traumatic brain injury, from a rollover accident, which also messed with their vision.
A TBI on top of everything else, that's a lot to handle.
Yeah, and remember, KB already has those demyelination lesions, the venous anomaly, the pituitary tumor.
Right, so regular monitoring of those neurological conditions is absolutely crucial.
And that's where things get, well, kind of crazy.
What happened?
So KB's telling us that at one point, a VA industrial engineer...
An industrial engineer. What are they doing involved in medical decisions?
I know, right? It's bizarre, but apparently this engineer basically dismissed the need for the brain scans that Mayo had been doing.
Dismissed the need. Based on what?
KB doesn't say, but this is despite the fact that later on, the Orlando VA's own neurologist recommends sending KB back to Mayo for, comparison scans.
So their own neurologist contradicts the engineer.
Yeah, and specifically to monitor the demyelination, the venous anomaly, the tumor, the whole shebang.
So initially, they're told they don't need the scans. Then their own VA neurologist says they do need the scans.
It's like, what? It makes you wonder, like, who's actually making these calls and what are they basing it on?
It's a real head scratcher and potentially dangerous if crucial imaging is being delayed or denied.
And then there's the whole debate about the type of scan, which gets really technical.
Technical how?
So Mayo Clinic, they use this Tesla 7 MRI.
Tesla 7, that's the highest resolution, right?
The best of the best. And they needed that level of detail to initially spot KB's venous anomaly.
So it's not just about having a scan, it's about having the right kind of scan.
Exactly, and KB specifically asked for a Tesla 7 so they could, keep track of any changes, any tiny things that might be happening.
To maintain that continuity of care makes sense.
With that Orlando VA, at first, they only ordered a 1.5 Tesla.
1.5, that's a big difference in resolution.
Huge, and even then, they only wanted to scan the pituitary, not the whole brain.
Even though there were known issues in other areas of the brain, right?
Right, so it's like they're missing the whole forest for one tree,
And Mayo's protocol of scanning the brain and pituitary together makes a lot of sense medically.
Oh yeah, for a couple reasons. First, well, KB has conditions in both areas.
Makes sense to monitor everything while you're at it.
Right, and then there's the contrast dye. They often need it for both scans.
And you can only use contrast so often safely.
Exactly. So doing two separate, less detailed scans, it adds more risk, more burden for KB, and you might miss something crucial.
Absolutely. Efficiency and patient well-being should go hand in hand.
And here's where it gets even weirder. KB asked to be referred to Mayo Clinic in Jacksonville.
Jacksonville? I thought we were in Orlando.
We are, but the Jacksonville Mayo, get this, they have a Tesla 7.
Oh, so they could have done the right scan and they're part of the same Mayo system.
Exactly. So it would have been like seamless coordination with KB's existing care team, all the specialists who already know their situation.
It seems like the obvious choice. So what happened?
Denied.
Denied. Seriously.
Straight up. No Jacksonville for you.
That doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't they facilitate that?
KB doesn't say, but it's frustrating, right? It's like, why make things more difficult?
Especially when there's a clear path to continue established and effective care.
And then hold on to your hat, because this is where it takes another twist. Eventually, the Orlando VA neurologist actually does request to send KB back to Mayo.
To Mayo. But they just denied the Jacksonville referral.
I know, right? But this time, it's for the Rochester Mayo, for those same scans they initially said weren't needed at Jacksonville.
So they go full circle. What a mess.
Total mess. And it makes you wonder if, like, anyone was even talking to each other, you know?
Lack of communication, inconsistent decision-making, it's concerning.
And KB points out that this whole resistance to the Mayo Care Plan seems to have started, at least in part, with the chiropractic department in Orlando.
Like they were pushing back against the established treatment from Mayo.
Yeah, like they had their own ideas about how things should be done and weren't really interested in what Mayo had already figured out.
That's not how coordinated care is supposed to work, especially when you've got experts weighing in.
And it makes you wonder, like, are the different departments at the VA even talking to each other? Or are they just, siloed off doing their own thing?
So, lack of communication internally, clashing with external expert recommendations. So far, not a good picture.
Not great, but there is a bright spot in KB's story, at least in the endocrinology department.
Endocrinology, so we're talking pituitary, Cushing's, that stuff.
Yep, and KB actually had a pretty good experience with an endocrinologist there.
What made this one different?
Well, for one, this doctor actually could access KB's medical records.
So the record access issue wasn't system-wide, it was more departmental.
Seems that way, which is still a problem, but at least this doctor, they were on the ball.
Okay, good sign.
And this endocrinologist, they actually knew about Cushing's, like really understood it, and they were able to confirm a lot of KB's history, make sure they were on the same page.
So a competent, knowledgeable doctor who actually had the full picture.
Finally, right. And they ordered a standard MRI, which is, the usual protocol for managing Cushing's.
So things are looking up in endocrinology, at least for now.
Yeah, but even then, more hiccups, because KB, being proactive, they informed the VA about the whole, comprehensive brain scan protocol.
The Tesla 7 at Mayo, for all the neurological stuff.
Exactly. And at first, the PCT team doctor, they claimed, get this, that they couldn't access the records again.
Are you kidding me? It's like a broken record at this point.
I know. So KB ends up having to, manually send their imaging reports.
So much for a unified electronic system. That's ridiculous.
Totally. But here's the kicker. Once neurology actually sees these reports, it's like panic mode.
Panic mode? How so?
KB describes it as like, holy moly, everyone's freaking out.
Because of what the scans showed?
Yeah, it's like they suddenly realized just how serious and complex KB's situation really was.
So all that resistance to getting the full picture, and then bam, reality hits.
And this is where it gets, almost comical, because neurology then decides they want to send KB to this MS clinic in Texas.
An MS clinic? What for?
Well, that's the thing. They did this without first checking KB's community care records.
Which would have shown
that KB already had a spinal tap, a clean one, that ruled out MS.
Oh, wow. So a rush to a specific diagnosis and treatment without all the facts.
And despite this whole Texas MS thing, KB kept asking, 10 times, they say, to just get that Tesla 7 scan at Mayo Jacksonville.
To maintain continuity of care with their established neurology team.
You got it, but guess what?
Denied again.
Every time.
It's like they're actively avoiding the most logical solution.
And this is where this name comes up, Alda Jimenez.
Alda Jimenez, who's that?
Well, according to KB, Jimenez is the one who ultimately denied the Tesla 7 scan request.
Okay, what's Jimenez's role? What's their background?
And this is where it gets really, really questionable. KB says their background is in, wait for it, zoology.
Zoology.
Like animals?
Animals. And KB did some digging, couldn't find any evidence of a medical license in Florida or any real clinical experience.
Hold on. So someone with a background in zoology is making decisions about complex human medical imaging.
That's what it looks like. And KB's convinced this whole denial was just about saving money, cost cutting.
So potentially putting budget concerns over a veteran's health and established care. That's a big accusation.
Huge. And it gets worse because instead of that Jacksonville scan, they wanted to send KB to Texas for tests they probably didn't even need.
For a condition that was already ruled out makes no sense.
None. And on top of that, just trying to get transferred from Orlando to Jacksonville for the Mayo referral, that was like pulling teeth.
You mean just the administrative process of moving between VA facilities?
Yeah, it was apparently a nightmare, which just adds insult to injury, It really highlights the systemic hurdles within the VA, even for something that should be straightforward.
And then we get to the whole health program.
Whole health, that's supposed to be about holistic care, right?
Right, incorporating different modalities. But here's the thing. The Orlando VA claimed that KB's Mayo developed care plan, which included all these things, was Ineffective.
Ineffective. The plan developed by specialists at Mayo Clinic.
I know, it's mind-blowing, and they didn't give KB any real explanation, no directives, no evidence, nothing.
So they just decided it was ineffective without justification. That's pretty bold.
And KB even says a chiropractor there threatened to deny treatment for their service-connected conditions.
Wow, that's serious. Did KB report that?
They filed a report with the WH hotline, and that actually got them temporary approval for some of the therapies.
Temporary, so not a permanent solution.
Nope, because later on, they got denied again, this time because they lumped all of KB's conditions under chronic pain management.
Chronic pain management? That's so general. It ignores the specifics of KB's case.
Totally, and they put this limit, one treatment per modality. Even though KB has, documented service-connected issues with their neck, their back, everything stemming from that.
And they need bilateral AFOs, which means the issues are impacting their legs and mobility significantly.
Right, but the VA is like, nope, chronic pain, one treatment, take it or leave it.
It's so frustrating, like they're not even addressing the underlying causes.
And even with all those abnormal scans, KB couldn't get x-rays or further imaging.
And who denied those requests?
The zoologist, Jimenez, saying there was no clinical justification.
It's like a bad joke at this point, a zoologist overruling medical necessity determinations.
And then the whole thing takes another crazy turn with the diagnosis codes.
Diagnosis codes, what about them?
Well, KB gets a heads up from this Army veteran patient advocate that the VA is denying care because of chronic pain.
Ah, so that broad diagnosis is coming back to bite them.
Big time. And KB decides to check their blue button records, the online portal.
To see what's going on with their diagnoses.
Exactly. And what they found was, well, shocking.
What was it?
So in Augusta, their primary care doctor, they had all these specific diagnoses listed: neck pain, back pain, fibromyalgia, joint pain, the works, right?
So detailed, accurate descriptions of their various conditions.
But then in Orlando, it had all been changed to just chronic pain.
Just chronic pain. Who made that change?
Some nurse practitioner KB had never even met or spoken to.
So they took a complex medical history and simplified it to a single generic code.
Exactly, and that's a huge problem because those codes, they determine what treatments you can get.
Absolutely. If the code doesn't match the specific condition, you might not be authorized for the right care.
So treatments for fibromyalgia, for example, might not be approved if the only diagnosis is chronic pain.
It's bureaucratic nonsense that has real consequences for patients.
And KB, they were understandably furious, so they contacted everyone: Stephen Lieberman, Dennis McDonough, Timothy Cook, the whole chain of command.
Trying to get someone to address this serious issue.
And they filed an OIG complaint, with the Office of Inspector General.
Taking it to the next level, it's got to be investigated.
But KB also asked to meet with the Orlando VA director, Timothy Cook, directly.
To discuss it face to face.
But that request, denied.
Denied. Seriously, they wouldn't even grant a meeting.
It's like they were just stonewalling. And to make matters even worse, around the same time, there were these reports of VA staff allegedly assaulting female veterans at the Orlando facility.
Oh, wow. That's a whole other level of concern.
Oh, right. It's like, what is going on in Orlando?
It paints a very disturbing picture of the overall environment there.
So, stepping back, looking at KB's experience as a whole, it's pretty clear that there are some major systemic issues within the VA, at least in Orlando.
Issues with continuity of care, communication breakdowns, questionable decision-making, the whole 9 yards.
And for me, the biggest aha moments are those instances where, non-medical personnel are making these huge calls about, life-altering medical care.
The industrial engineer dismissing the need for scans, the zoologist denying the Tesla 7. It's just baffling.
And then that sudden panic from neurology when they finally saw KB's records, it's like they were operating in the dark, and it could have been really dangerous.
And don't forget the diagnosis code change. That's a huge red flag.
Absolutely. Someone manipulating those codes without any real medical justification, that's scary.
Because it directly impacts what care a veteran can access.
And for you, our listeners, KB's story, it really shows how vulnerable veterans can be, especially those with complex medical needs, when they have to rely on the VA.
It's a wake-up call. We need to be asking some serious questions about how the VA is handling these cases.
Like, how can we ensure that everyone has access to their full medical records no matter where they go?
And how can we make sure that local VA staff are respecting the recommendations of specialists, especially when those recommendations are coming from leading institutions?
And maybe the most important question, how do we guarantee that the people making these decisions about veterans' health care are actually qualified to do so?
It's about accountability, transparency, and putting veterans' needs first.
Because KB's experience, it makes you wonder, if this can happen to them with their extensive history and all these specialists involved, what about other veterans who might not have those resources or that level of advocacy?
It's a chilling thought, and it demands a much deeper look into the systemic challenges that clearly exist within the VA healthcare system.
We need to ensure that all veterans, regardless of their situation, are receiving the care they deserve.
Care that's consistent, high quality, and based on their individual needs, not on arbitrary rules or budget constraints.
Because ultimately, these are the men and women who have served our country.
They deserve a system that serves them in return, without question, without delay, and without compromise.
So keep the conversation going, folks. Share KB's story, ask those tough questions, and let's work together to make sure that every veteran gets the care they need and deserve.
Because their well-being is our responsibility, and their voices need to be heard.